She set his favorite cup of coffee on his desk every morning for 3 years, and not once did he look up. On the night of their wedding anniversary ball, Anna Whitfield stood in a gown of ivory silk, surrounded by 100 candles, and watched her husband Andrew walk past her without a single word, straight toward another conversation, another laugh, another world that did not include her. That was the night something inside her went very, very quiet. If this story already has your heart subscribed to this channel, drop your city in the comments, and let's see just how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything. The summer of 1814 came to Whitfield Estate like it always did, heavy and golden thick, with the smell of honeysuckle climbing the fence posts and the distant sound of horses working the south field. Virginia knew how to dress itself up fine in July. But inside the grand house on the hill, beauty had a way of feeling like a prison when no one inside it bothered to look at you. Anna Whitfield had learned over 3 years of marriage that a woman could disappear entirely while still standing in her own home. She was not a ghost. She was flesh and breath and heartbeat. She rose before dawn to oversee the household accounts. She met with the estate foreman every Tuesday. She corresponded with the families in the tenant cottages when the harvests ran thin, quietly directing food stores from the main cellar without making anyone feel the shame of needing help. She did every single thing a wife of Andrew Blackwell's standing was expected to do, and she did it without complaint, without recognition, and without being asked twice. And still, she might as well have been one of the portraits lining the East Corridor. On the morning that would mark the beginning of everything falling apart, and then much later falling into place, Anna was sitting at the small writing desk in the corner of the front parlor. The household staff moved around her with the practiced quiet of people who had learned her routines. She was drafting a letter to the widow Hargrove in the village, whose youngest had taken sick with fever. She did not hear Andrew come in. She rarely did. He moved through his own house like a man who owned it thoroughly and lived in it not at all. "The Caldwells are coming Friday," he said without greeting, without looking at her. He was already crossing to the sideboard, pouring himself a glass of water, eyes on some middle distance that Anna had never been able to locate. "I expect the house to be ready." Anna set down her pen. "The house is always ready, Andrew." "Good." He turned to leave. "Andrew." He stopped, but he did not turn around. Anna looked at the back of his coat, fine wool, perfectly pressed, the kind of coat that said everything about a man's position and nothing about his soul. She had pressed that coat herself last winter when their housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, had been ill. She wondered if he knew that. She suspected he did not. "Will you be joining us for dinner this evening?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She had trained it to be steady a long time ago. A pause, just long enough to sting. "I have business in town." "You had business in town yesterday as well." "Anna." And there it was, just her name spoken in that particular tone he had. Not cruel, never cruel, just finished, like a door closing. "I don't see what one has to do with the other." She picked up her pen again. "No," she said quietly. "I don't suppose you do." He left. The room felt exactly the same after he was gone as it had when he was in it. That, Anna thought, was perhaps the saddest thing she had ever understood about her own marriage. The Caldwells arrived Friday as promised, Thomas Caldwell and his wife Marybeth, who was one of those women who filled a room the moment she entered it, loud with warmth and stories trailing perfume and good humor like a comet trailing light. Anna had always privately adored Marybeth Caldwell for precisely that quality. She was the kind of woman who could make you feel for the length of an afternoon that the world was generous. "Anna, you look absolutely lovely," Marybeth said, clasping both her hands at the doorway. "This heat agrees with you, doesn't it, Thomas?" Thomas Caldwell was a large man with kind eyes who seemed perpetually aware that his wife was the more interesting of the two of them, and who was at peace with this. "It does," he agreed affably. Andrew appeared at Anna's shoulder. She felt him before she saw him. That precise social version of himself that he became in company. Warmer, present, attentive in all the ways he was not when it was just the two of them. "Thomas, good of you to come." A handshake. A genuine smile. "Marybeth, you haven't aged a day." Flatterer. Marybeth laughed. "Your husband is a scoundrel, Anna." "Yes," Anna said, and smiled back. "He certainly can be." If Andrew heard the weight beneath those words, he gave no sign of it. Dinner was lovely, as Anna's dinners always were. The food was perfect. The table was set with the pale blue linens that complemented the candelabras. The conversation moved through politics, through the gossip of neighboring estates, through Thomas's opinion on the tobacco prices, and Marybeth's enthusiastic account of her niece's recent engagement. Anna guided it all with the quiet skill of a woman who had spent years learning how to be the invisible engine behind a visible machine. She refilled glasses before they were empty. She steered topics away from friction with a well-placed question. She laughed at the right moments. At no point did Andrew look at her and say she did all of this. At no point did he need to, because at no point did anyone ask. It was Marybeth who finally said it halfway through the dessert course, with the particular boldness of a woman who had drunk enough claret to say true things. "Andrew," she said, setting down her spoon with a decisive little click, "I hope you know what a treasure you have in this woman." Andrew glanced at Anna with the expression of a man who had been asked a question in a language he did not quite speak. "Anna manages the estate beautifully," he said. "I'm not talking about the estate." Marybeth's voice was warm, but her eyes were sharp. "I'm talking about her." A silence settled over the table. Anna felt her heart do something complicated and painful beneath her ribs. She reached for her water glass. "Of course," Andrew said in the tone that meant the conversation was over. Thomas cleared his throat and said something about horses. Later, when the Caldwells had gone and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Anna stood at the window of her bedroom and listened to the sound of Andrew's study door closing down the hall. The same sound it made every night, the same distance. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass of the window. 3 years. She had given this marriage 3 years of everything she had: her intelligence, her energy, her patience, her pride. She had made herself smaller, quieter, more useful. She had told herself that love was a slow fire, that some men were simply not made for easy warmth, that Andrew Blackwell was a good man who simply struggled to show it. She had told herself many things, but standing there in the July dark, listening to that closed door, Anna Whitfield felt something shift inside her. Not break she had broken before quietly in private, and put herself back together without a sound. This was different. This was the feeling of a woman who has finally, at the bottom of her patience, made a decision. She was done being invisible. She did not know yet what that meant. She did not know yet what shape it would take. But the decision sat in her chest like a coal, small and dark and very, very hot. Hi. The next morning she rode out to the village alone. She had been meaning to check on the widow Hargrove's boy for 2 days, and she was tired of meaning to do things and waiting for a moment that Andrew might accompany her. He would not accompany her. He never did. She saddled her own horse, a dappled gray mare named Pearl, that she had chosen herself and paid for from her own inheritance, and she rode out in the early morning cool before the day turned punishing. The village of Claremont sat 3 miles from the estate, down a road that cut through fields of summer corn. It was small and proud, and a little worn at the edges the way working places often are. Anna had been riding out here for 2 years now, quietly and without announcement, bringing medicines and supplies, and occasionally just her presence, which she had learned meant more to some people than goods ever could. She tied Pearl to the post outside the Hargrove cottage and knocked. Martha Hargrove came to the door with the expression of a woman who had not slept in days dark, beneath the eyes thin around the mouth, but standing straight. "Mrs. Blackwell," she said, with the careful formality of someone who was grateful and did not quite know how to say it. "Martha." Anna held up the basket she'd brought: brothcloth, a small bottle of the medicine Dr. Pembroke had recommended. "How is he?" Better this morning. Martha's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Fever broke in the night. Thank God. Anna stepped inside without waiting to be invited, because she had learned that waiting to be invited meant some people would never let you help them. Sit down, Martha. You look like you've been standing guard for a week. Near enough. Anna moved through the small cottage with the ease of someone who had visited it many times. She set the broth on the fire to warm. She checked the boy 8 years old, pale against his pillow, but breathing easier, and smoothed his blanket with a hand that was practiced in the gesture of care. When she came back to the front room, Martha was sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup watching her. I don't know why you do it, Martha said, not unkindly, honestly. A woman of your standing, you could send someone. I could, Anna agreed. She pulled out the chair across from her and sat. But then I wouldn't know if you were all right. Martha looked at her for a long moment. Are you? Martha asked quietly. Anna blinked. It was such a simple question. She could not remember the last time anyone had asked it genuinely without expecting any particular answer. Her husband never asked. Her mother's letters were full of social news and gentle reminders of duty. Even Mary Beth Caldwell, for all her warmth, asked the question in the way of a woman who expected to hear fine. I'm working on it, Anna said, and somehow in that small cottage kitchen, with the smell of broth beginning to warm the air and a child breathing easier in the next room, that answer felt true in a way that nothing had felt in a very long time. She was riding home along the field road when she first encountered Henry Westcott. She heard him before she saw him, a horse in some distress, a man's voice low and even speaking the particular kind of careful calm that people use when they are trying very hard not to panic. She rounded the bend and found him on foot, holding the bridle of a chestnut stallion that had clearly thrown a shoe and was not happy about its situation. He looked up at the sound of Pearl's hooves. He was perhaps 35, lean and sun-browned, with the look of a man who spent more time outdoors than in drawing rooms. He wore his coat without ceremony and his hat pushed back slightly, which Anna had always privately thought was the hat-wearing style of a man who was thinking about something more interesting than how he appeared. Ma'am, he said, touching the brim anyway. I apologize for taking up the road. You're not taking up the road, Anna said. You're managing a lame horse. There's a difference. She pulled Pearl to a stop. Henry Westcott, isn't it, from the Grayfield property east of town? Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a kind of alert attention. That's right. And you're Mrs. Blackwell from Whitfield Estate. Anna, she said. Then, because she was not entirely sure why she'd said it, Anna is fine. He nodded, accepting this without making anything of it. I reckon I'll be walking the rest of the way unless you know a farrier who makes house calls on the road. There's one in Claremont. Old Thomas Hale. He won't mind if you tell him I sent you. Westcott looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. It was not the expression men usually gave her, the polite non-seeing of a woman in her social position, the automatic social acknowledgement that meant nothing. It was the expression of a man who was actually listening. That's kind of you, he said. It's practical, Anna replied, and then before she fully thought it through, I'm heading back to the estate. The road to Hale's shop runs alongside the north field. If you'd like, I'll ride along and show you the turn. He considered her for a moment, this man with his lame horse and his frank expression. I'd appreciate that, ma'am, he said. Anna. She turned Pearl north, and Henry Westcott walked alongside her leading his horse, and they talked about nothing significant. The weather, the corn crop, a new family who'd settled in the valley, and yet somehow by the time they reached the turning for Thomas Hale's shop, Anna realized that she had laughed twice. Genuinely, without calculating whether it was appropriate. She could not remember the last time that had happened either. She rode back to Whitfield Estate in the afternoon heat with dust on her boots and something light and confusing stirring somewhere in her chest that she did not yet have a name for. Behind her in the house on the hill, Andrew Blackwell sat at his study desk and worked his figures and did not notice she had been gone for 4 hours. but someone had seen her this morning, and something about it that small and quiet and entirely unexpected felt like the first breath of air in a very long time. The name Henry Westcott came up again 3 days later, and Anna had not been expecting it. She was in the kitchen garden with Mrs. Doyle, going over the preserving schedule for the late summer harvest, when Betsy, the youngest of the house girls, 16, and easily flustered, came hurrying around the corner with the particular expression of someone carrying news they weren't sure they were supposed to deliver. "Ma'am, there's a gentleman at the gate. Says his name is Mr. Westcott, and he's brought something for you." Anna kept her expression perfectly neutral. "Show him to the front parlor, Betsy. I'll be there directly." Mrs. Doyle raised one eyebrow with the eloquence of a woman who had been running households long enough to read everything into nothing. Anna pretended not to notice. Henry Westcott was standing in the middle of the parlor when she entered, holding his hat in both hands and looking at a painting on the wall with the genuine attention of a man who actually saw things. He turned when he heard her. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "You're not." She gestured toward the chairs. "Please sit." He sat. She sat across from him. Between them on the low table was the small bundle he had brought, a cutting of wild rosemary wrapped in brown paper, and a jar of honey from what he explained were his own hives. "Old Thomas Hale wouldn't take a cent for the shoe," Westcott said. "Said you'd already settled it without telling me. I figured the least I could do was bring something in return." "You didn't have to do that." "No," he agreed. "I reckon I wanted to." Anna looked at the honey jar. There was something disarming about the simplicity of it. No card, no formal gift basket, no calculated social gesture. Just honey from a man's own hives, and a bunch of rosemary from a field somewhere. "That was thoughtful, Mr. Westcott," she said. "Henry," he said. Then with a small, self-aware smile, "You said Anna was fine, seemed fair." Something unwound very slightly somewhere behind her sternum. "Fair enough," she said. They talked for 20 minutes. It should have been the careful surface-level conversation of two people who barely knew each other and were observing the appropriate proprieties. Instead, it wandered from the honey he'd started keeping bees 3 years ago, after buying the Grayfield property, mostly to give himself something to do with his hands, while he thought to the village he'd been quietly funding a new roof for the Claremont schoolhouse, which Anna had not known, to the question of what a person did with a piece of land they genuinely loved and genuinely didn't know how to make profitable yet. "Most men I know would sooner admit to losing money at cards than admit they don't know something about their own business," Anna said. Henry laughed. It was an honest sound. "Most men I know haven't spent enough time being wrong to get comfortable with it." Anna looked at him. "And you have more than enough." He said it without self-pity, just as fact. She found herself thinking for just a moment about Andrew, about the way Andrew never once said, "I don't know," the way his certainty filled every room and left no space for doubt or question, or the kind of honest fumbling that Henry Westcott was describing. It was not a fair comparison. She knew it wasn't fair. She made herself stop making it. "Well," she said, standing, "thank you for the honey and the rosemary." He stood immediately, the way men of genuine manners did, not performance, just instinct. "Thank you for the farrier." At the door he paused. "Mrs. Blackwell, Anna, the Grayfield property borders the north pasture. If you ever ride that direction again, you're welcome to the road." She met his eyes. They were steady and clear and entirely uncomplicated. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. She closed the door. She stood in the entry hall for a long moment with her hand still on the latch, and she thought about the word welcome. How long it had been since she had felt it. Andrew came home from town that evening in a mood she recognized, not angry, just closed. The kind of closed that meant he had spent the day in meetings with men who made decisions that affected his finances, and none of those decisions had gone quite the way he intended. He ate dinner with the systematic joylessness of a man fulfilling an obligation, and said perhaps 11 words across the entire meal. Anna counted. She had gotten into the habit of counting once, trying to understand the pattern of him. She had stopped when she realized there wasn't one. "The Hargrove boy is recovered," she offered. "Good. I'm thinking of organizing a small lending library for the village. Dr. Pembroke says several of the families have children who've shown interest in reading but can't afford—" "Anna." He set down his fork. "I've had a very long day." She looked at him across the white tablecloth, across the candles, across 3 years of evenings just like this one. "So have I," she said quietly. "I'm simply attempting to have a conversation with my husband." Andrew looked at her. Really looked at her the way he almost never did. For just a second, she saw something move behind his eyes. Something that might have been guilt or recognition, or something older and harder that she didn't have a name for. Then it was gone. "We can discuss it another time," he said, and picked up his fork again. Anna folded her napkin, set it on the table, pushed back her chair. "Yes," she said. "We can." She did not slam any doors. She never did. She walked upstairs at a perfectly measured pace and sat on the edge of her bed in the warm dark and breathed through something that was not quite grief and not quite anger and was becoming very slowly a kind of resolve. She thought about what Martha Hargrove had asked her in that kitchen 3 days ago. "Are you all right?" She thought about what she had answered. "I'm working on it." She pulled out the small notebook she kept in her nightstand. She had always kept notebooks, written things down since she was a girl, the way some people need to see their own thoughts in order to believe them, and she wrote one sentence: "A woman who is only useful is not yet seen." She closed the notebook, put it away. She slept better than she had in months. The lending library became real within 2 weeks. Anna did not ask Andrew's permission. She did not ask his opinion. She identified a room above the Claremont General Store that the owner, a broad-shouldered man named Curtis Webb, was willing to let for a nominal fee. She wrote to 3 families in Charlottesville who had mentioned at various social occasions over the years that they had books going unread. She organized the responses. She drew up a system, simple, based on trust. A borrowed book returned within a month, or a neighbor stepped in to remind you. She was sorting through the first donation of volumes on a Thursday morning when Henry Westcott walked through the door. She looked up from the crate of books. He looked at the room, the shelves Curtis had helped her build the previous weekend. The small table and 2 chairs she had brought from the estate's storage, the chalkboard on the wall where she'd written the borrowing rules in her own hand. "I heard about this," he said. "Thought I'd come see for myself." And he looked at her. "And I've got 14 books at home that haven't been read since I bought the property. I'll bring them Friday if you'll take them." "I'll take them," she said. He rolled up his sleeves. He was always doing that. She had noticed the unconscious preparation of a man who expected to be useful and said, "What else needs doing?" Anna looked at the half-sorted crate and the stack of shelves that still needed labeling, and the second crate she had not yet opened. "All of it," she said honestly. "Good," he said, and picked up a book. They worked for 2 hours. Side by side, talking in the easy, distracted way of people doing something with their hands, the kind of talking that had no stakes and no performance in it. Henry told her about his childhood in Maryland, a father who had been a schoolteacher, a mother who had read aloud to him every night until he was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then missed it immediately. Anna told him about William, her brother 2 years younger, dead of fever at 24, who had been the one person in her life who had treated her opinions as if they mattered. "He used to argue with me," she said, pausing with a book in her hands. "Just genuinely argue, about everything. History, politics, what we should have for Sunday supper. Most people don't argue with women. They agree and then ignore you. William actually argued." "He sounds like someone worth knowing," Henry said. "He was the best person I knew," she said, and then with the small shock of a woman who has said something more honest than she meant to. "I still write letters to him sometimes, in my notebook, just to sort out what I'm thinking." Henry didn't say anything for a moment. He finished shelving the row of books in front of him, straightening the spines with the same care he seemed to give everything. "My mother did that," he said finally. "After my father passed, said it kept him in the room." He glanced at her. "I think that's one of the braver things a person can do. Keeps talking to someone, even when they can't answer back. Anna looked down at the book in her hands. She had known this man for less than 3 weeks. She had no idea why she had told him about William. She had not told anyone about the letters, not even Mary Beth Caldwell, who was her closest thing to a friend. "I don't know why I told you that," she said. "You don't have to know," he said simply. "I won't tell anyone." And the thing was, she believed him. Immediately, without deliberation, in the way that truth sometimes arrived. She believed him. That was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. Andrew found out about the library from Thomas Caldwell, which Anna had not anticipated. He came into the sitting room on a Friday evening, where she was going over the circulation records, 12 books out to 9 families in 11 days, which she was quietly proud of, and he stood in the doorway with an expression she had difficulty reading. "Thomas tells me you've set up some kind of lending library in Claremont," he said. "Yes?" She did not look up immediately. She finished the notation she was making, then set down her pen. "I did. With my money. With the household funds I manage," she said carefully, "which have been under budget this quarter. The fee for the room was $3 a month. I considered it a reasonable use of the surplus." Andrew stepped into the room. He was not angry. She kept waiting for him to be angry because anger at least was a form of engagement. He was something more unsettling. He was confused. "Why?" he said. Anna looked at him. "Because there are children in this county who want to read and can't afford books. Because their parents work our fields and our neighbors' fields and deserve better than what they're getting. Because I had the means to do something, and I did it." She paused. "Was there a particular part of that you'd like me to explain?" Silence. Andrew looked at her as if he was seeing in some incomplete and effortful way a person he had not quite registered was there. "You should have asked me," he said. "Should I?" Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge now, not sharp enough to cut, but sharp enough to be felt. "I ask you things, Andrew. You say we'll discuss it another time. Another time doesn't come. So I did it myself." He opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved across his face that she had no category for. "The Caldwells think it's admirable," he said finally, as if this settled something. "I don't do it because the Caldwells think anything," Anna said. She picked up her pen. He stood there another moment, and then he left, same as always. But this time, standing in the hallway, he paused. Just briefly. Just long enough that she heard at the interruption in his step the second of stillness before he continued walking. She didn't know what it meant. She wrote it in her notebook that night. He stopped. For the first time, he stopped. It was Mary Beth Caldwell who first said the thing out loud that everyone else was carefully not saying. She arrived unannounced on a Tuesday. Mary Beth's preferred method of visiting, because she claimed announced visits required everyone to be on their best behavior. And she was not interested in people's best behavior, and found Anna in the front room writing letters, and sat herself down without invitation, and accepted the tea that appeared as if by magic because Mrs. Doyle had always had excellent instincts about Mary Beth Caldwell. "People are talking about you," Mary Beth said, stirring her cup. Anna did not look up. "People always talk. They're saying you've been spending time with Henry Westcott. Henry Westcott donated books to the lending library and has helped me organize 2 community events in Claremont." Anna set down her pen and looked at her friend directly. "That is the entire scope of what is happening." Mary Beth looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been married for 22 years and knew considerably more about the entire scope of things than she was being given credit for. "He's a good man," she said. "Not accusatory, just careful." "I know he is," Anna said. "And Andrew?" The question sat in the air between them. Anna picked up her teacup. "Andrew is my husband," she said. "That's not what I asked." "Mary Beth," Anna's voice was gentle but firm. "I am not doing anything wrong. I know you're not." Mary Beth set down her cup and leaned forward, and the brightness dropped out of her voice, and something realer came in. "I know you, Anna. I know you have been running that estate and tending that village and being every inch the perfect wife for 3 years while that man walked past you like furniture. And I know that Henry Westcott looks at you like you are the most interesting person in the room." Anna said nothing. "That's not nothing," Mary Beth said quietly. "A woman who has been invisible for 3 years being looked at like that. That is not nothing." The silence stretched. "No," Anna admitted, and her voice was very quiet. "It isn't." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Outside, a horse passed on the road. The tea cooled. "Just be careful," Mary Beth said finally. "I am always careful," Anna said. But that night, alone in her room, she sat with the word that Mary Beth hadn't said, and she hadn't said, and that was sitting there anyway between the lines of everything. She opened her notebook, and she did not write anything for a long time. Then she wrote, "Being seen is not the same as being loved. But God help me, it feels like breathing." She closed the cover. She pressed her hand flat against it. Down the hall, Andrew Blackwell sat at his desk in the quiet, and did not know that something was changing under his own roof in the heart of the woman he had forgotten to see, and that the cost of forgetting was already slowly beginning to come due. The storm came in fast, the way Virginia storms always did in August. No warning, just a sky that turned the color of a bruise and then opened without apology. Anna was already 3 miles from the estate when it hit. She had ridden out that afternoon to deliver a second round of medicines to the Claremont families. Dr. Pembroke had sent word that 2 more children had come down with the same summer fever that had taken the Hargrove boy, and Anna had not waited for permission or company or a better moment. She had loaded Pearl's saddlebag and gone. The rain came sideways. Pearl spooked at a crack of thunder, not badly. Just enough, just the half-second of sideways lurch that Anna wasn't braced for, and then the road came up to meet her, and she hit it hard, left shoulder and hip, and lay there in the mud for a moment that felt much longer than it was staring up at a sky that was doing its absolute worst. She sat up. Her shoulder screamed. Her pride screamed louder. She got to her feet, caught Pearl's bridle, and stood there in the rain, doing a quiet inventory of her own damage. Nothing broken. Everything furious. She was trying to decide whether to ride on or turn back when she heard hoofbeats on the road behind her. Henry Westcott pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet away and was off it before it had fully settled, crossing to her in 3 strides, with his hat already soaked through, and his expression carrying the specific intensity of a man who has just seen something happen that he could not prevent, and is very carefully not saying everything he is thinking. "Are you hurt?" he said. "I'm fine." He looked at her the way people look at other people when they have just watched them fall off a horse. "Anna, my shoulder. It's not serious." She held Pearl's bridle tighter than necessary. "What are you doing on this road?" "Same thing, you are near enough. Curtis Webb sent word to me that 2 of his tenant families needed help, and I was the closer ride." He reached out, not touching her, just gesturing toward her left side. "Let me see. I told you it's—" "I know what you told me." His voice was steady, but it had something underneath it. "Let me see anyway." She turned grudgingly. He examined her shoulder with the careful hands of a man who had dealt with injuries before ranch work, she imagined, or something before that, and said nothing for a moment. "Not dislocated," he said finally, "but you're going to feel it tomorrow." "I feel it right now," she said. Something that might have been a laugh moved across his face and then disappeared because neither of them was in a position to find anything funny. The rain had not let up. They were both soaked through to the skin and standing in the middle of a road that was becoming a shallow river. "The medicines are still in the saddlebag," she said. "I'm not turning back." Henry looked at her for a moment. The rain ran off the brim of his hat. He was thinking she could see him thinking, could see him weighing what a sensible man would say against something else, something that knew better than to waste its breath. "Then we go together," he said. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and did not argue. They rode to the Webb tenants together in the rain and delivered what they had brought and stood in the doorway of the second cottage long enough to be sure the family inside was all right. And through all of it, the mud and the wet, and the miserable half-dark of a storm-swallowed afternoon. Henry Westcott stayed at her left side, slightly behind, not hovering, but present in a way that she felt without seeing. It was on the road back that it happened. She didn't hear the rider coming from the Whitfield direction. The rain masked everything. She only knew Andrew was there when Pearl suddenly pulled to the right in response to the other horse, and she looked up and saw her husband 20 feet away, sitting very still on his big bay gelding, staring at them. At her. At Henry. At the two of them side by side in the rain, on a road they had no particular reason to be on together. The stillness of him was worse than anything he might have said. "Andrew," Anna said. He did not respond. His eyes moved from her face to Henry's and back again, and in that movement was an entire conversation that nobody was having out loud. Henry touched the brim of his hat. "Mr. Blackwell." Andrew's jaw was tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled in the way that cost something to control. "I came looking for you," he said to Anna. "Mrs. Doyle said you'd ridden out before the storm. I had medicines to deliver. In this weather. The children didn't stop being sick because of the weather." Another silence, worse than the first. "You fell," Andrew said. It was not a question. He had seen it. She didn't know how long he had been watching before she noticed him, but he had seen it. "I'm fine. Your coat is torn at the shoulder." She looked down. He was right. She hadn't noticed. When she looked back up, Andrew was looking at Henry Westcott with an expression she had never seen on her husband's face before. It took her a moment to name it because she had spent 3 years telling herself it wasn't possible. It was fear. Not of Henry. Of what Henry's presence here meant. Of what it said about a marriage in which a wife rode into storms alone because there was no one at home who would have come with her. "I'll see Mrs. Blackwell home," Andrew said, and his voice had changed quieter, more careful, like a man handling something he has just realized is fragile and may have already cracked. Henry looked at Anna. Just for a second. A question without words. She gave the smallest nod. "Of course," Henry said. He touched his hat again, turned his horse and rode east without another word, without looking back, with the dignity of a man who understood exactly what was happening and was removing himself from it. Anna and Andrew rode home in the rain without speaking. The silence between them was not the old silence, the flat, indifferent quiet of two people who had run out of things to say to each other. This was a different animal entirely. This silence had a pulse. "Balked." Andrew had a fire built in the sitting room by the time Anna had changed out of her wet clothes. Mrs. Doyle brought broth and said nothing which was its own form of eloquence. Anna sat in the chair nearest the fire and held the cup in both hands and waited. She did not have to wait long. Andrew came in and stood across the room from her and said, "How long?" She looked up at him. "How long what? How long have you been riding out to that village, alone, doing all of it? The library, the medicines, the—" He stopped, pushed a hand through his hair, which she had almost never seen him do. "How long have you been doing all of this without telling me?" "I've been doing it for 2 years, she said. "I told you about the library. You said we'd discuss it another time." He absorbed that. "And Westcott," he said. The name came out careful, like he was carrying it. "Henry Westcott has helped with the library and with the community work," Anna said. "That is factually accurate, and you are welcome to confirm it with anyone in Claremont." "That's not what I'm asking." "Then ask what you're asking Andrew." He crossed the room and sat down. Not in his usual chair, the one positioned at the correct conversational distance, the one that was his by habit and right. He sat in the chair closest to her, near enough that she could see the rain still damp in his hair, the lines around his eyes that she had watched deepen over 3 years and never mentioned. "Is there something I should know?" he said. Anna looked at him for a long time. The fire shifted. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease. "No," she said finally. And it was true. Henry Westcott had not crossed a single line, had never said or done anything that was not entirely correct, had given her nothing but conversation and help, and the uncomplicated dignity of being treated as someone worth talking to. There is nothing you need to know about Henry Westcott. Andrew nodded. Once. The relief on his face was brief but visible, and it made something ache in her chest, because it meant he had been afraid, and fear meant caring, and caring meant he was not as indifferent as he had always appeared, and that made everything more complicated and more painful at once. "But there is something you should know," she said. He looked at her. "I have been disappearing," Anna said, and her voice was steady and clear and entirely serious. "Slowly. For 3 years. And you haven't noticed, and I have been. I have been so angry at you for not noticing Andrew, and so tired of being angry, and so tired of being invisible in my own house. And I don't—" She stopped, breathed. "I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what it means for us. But I needed to say it out loud to you at least once, so that you know, so that it is real, so that I am real." The fire. The rain outside softening. Andrew Blackwell sat across from his wife and said nothing for so long that she thought he was going to do what he always did. Close retreat. Let it pass. Then he said very quietly, "I know." She blinked. "I know," he said again. "I have known and I haven't." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I don't know how to explain it. I don't have an explanation that is good enough. I have known that you were there, Anna. I have always known you were there, and I don't know why I have never—" He couldn't finish the sentence. She looked at him. This was the most he had ever said to her. In 3 years, this was the most her husband had ever said to her directly about anything that mattered. "Then why?" she said, and her voice cracked just slightly, just enough to be heard. He had no answer. She could see him searching for one and coming up empty. And she watched the careful control of him falter and crack at the edges, and it did not feel like victory. It felt like finally reaching the bottom of something she had been falling through for a very long time. "I need more than silence, Andrew," she said. "I cannot live my whole life in this house being useful and invisible and grateful that you aren't unkind. I cannot do it. I won't." He flinched. Actually flinched. She had not known he was capable of it. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I am still here," she said. "Right now, I am still here, and I am telling you that something has to change. I don't know what. I don't know how. But I need you to hear that I am a person in this house, Andrew. Not a function. Not a convenience. A person. Silence. Long and deep and completely different from every silence that had come before it." Then he said, and his voice was rough with something she had never heard in it, "I hear you." 3 words. Small words. But they landed in her chest like something she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. She nodded, set down her cup, and stood. "Good," she said. "Then we'll talk tomorrow, when we're not soaking wet and half frightened and all of this." She gestured vaguely at the room, the fire, the entire saturated evening. "We'll talk tomorrow." She walked to the door. "Anna." She stopped, did not turn around. "I'm glad you weren't badly hurt," he said. "Today, on the road." She stood very still. "So am I," she said, and she went upstairs. She did not sleep well, not because of her shoulder, though it ached considerably, as Henry had promised it would, but because the evening kept replaying in the particular relentless way that significant evenings do. And she could not get the image of Andrew's face out of her mind. Not the closed, distant version she was accustomed to. The other one. The one she had glimpsed when he said, "I know." She lay in the dark and asked herself the question she had been avoiding for weeks. What did she actually want? It should have been simple. It was not simple at all. She wanted the man. Henry Westcott had turned out to be present, honest, genuinely interested in who she was. She wanted the straightforwardness of those 2 hours sorting books, the ease of being heard without performing herself into existence first. But she also, and this was the part that was hardest to admit, she also wanted Andrew to become that. Not Henry. Andrew. Her husband. The man she had married and vowed herself to and had not stopped caring about, even when caring about him felt like carrying water in her bare hands. She wanted it not to be too late. She opened her notebook in the dark and felt for the pen and wrote by feel, not looking at what she was writing. I think I am still in love with a man who doesn't know how to love me back. I don't know if that is hope or ruin. She closed it, lay back. Down the hall, she heard something that made her go entirely still. Andrew's study door. The door that always closed at the end of the evening, with its particular decisive click, opened. Footsteps in the hall. They stopped outside her door. She held her breath. A long pause. Long enough that she could have counted to 15. Then the footsteps moved on. Down the stairs. Into the lower part of the house. She did not know where he went. She did not know what he had been thinking standing outside her door in the dark. She did not know if he had raised his hand to knock and put it down again, or if he had simply stood there, or if she had imagined the whole thing. She knew only that for the first time in 3 years, Andrew Blackwell had moved toward her, even if only for a moment, even if only in the dark, even if he had ultimately turned away. It was not enough, not nearly enough. But it was something. And in the morning, while Anna was at breakfast and Andrew was not yet down, Mrs. Doyle set a small vase of wildflowers on the table. Not the formal roses from the garden, but field flowers, purple and white, and slightly untidy, the kind that grew along the road to Claremont. Anna looked at them for a long time. She looked at Mrs. Doyle. Mrs. Doyle said with exquisite neutrality, "They were on the kitchen table when I came down this morning, ma'am. I don't know who put them there." Anna said nothing. She poured her coffee. She sat with those wildflowers for the whole of breakfast, and she thought about the word hope, about what it cost to carry it, and what it cost to let it go, and what it meant that even now, even after everything, she could not quite bring herself to put it down. The wildflowers stayed on the breakfast table for 3 days before anyone mentioned them. Anna did not mention them. Mrs. Doyle did not mention them. And Andrew, who came down each morning to find them there in their small vase, said nothing either, but he looked at them. Every single morning he looked at them, and then he looked at Anna, and then he looked away. That was more looking than he had done in 3 years combined, and Anna did not know what to do with it, except to keep pouring her coffee, and keep going about her day, and keep waiting for the conversation he had promised her was coming. It came on a Wednesday. She was in the library, the estate library, not the one in Claremont, going through a box of William's things that her mother had finally sent from Charleston. Books, mostly. A few letters. The small carved wooden compass that had sat on William's desk since he was 12 years old, and that Anna had given him herself, saved up 3 months of her own small allowance to buy it. She was holding the compass when Andrew walked in. He saw immediately what she was doing. Something in his face shifted not away this time, but toward her, the way she had been wanting him to move toward her for years. "Your mother sent his things," he said. Finally. Anna set the compass down carefully. She had been keeping them. I think she wasn't ready. Andrew came and sat across from her. Not at his desk, not at a proper conversational distance, close enough that she could see the compass on the table between them. "I didn't know him well," Andrew said. "William, I wish I had." Anna looked at her husband. He was telling the truth. She could see it. "He would have liked you," she said. "Then honestly, he would have argued with you constantly and liked you enormously." Something moved across Andrew's face that was dangerously close to a real smile. Then it steadied into something more serious. He reached into his coat and placed an envelope on the table beside the compass. Cream paper, her name on the outside in William's handwriting. The ink faded with time. Anna went very still. "Your mother sent it with the box," Andrew said. "She asked me to give it to you directly. Said she didn't trust herself not to read it again and keep it again." Anna looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. "He wrote it 6 weeks before he died," Andrew said quietly. "Your mother told me that much." The room felt different. Everything felt different. Anna reached out and picked up the letter and held it, and for a long moment did not open it, just held it the way you hold something you are not sure you are ready for. Then she opened it. William's handwriting was exactly as she remembered, hurried and sideways, the letters of a man who always thought faster than his hand could move. She read it once quickly the way you read something that is shocking, just to get to the end of it. Then she read it again slowly. When she finished, she put it down on the table between them and looked at her husband. "He knew," she said. Andrew met her eyes. "He wrote to me," Anna said. Her voice was careful and deliberate, the way it got when she was holding something large and needed to carry it precisely. 3 months before he died. He wrote that he was worried about me. He said... She looked down at the letter, then back up. He said he had visited us at Christmas, and he watched us at dinner, and he was worried that I was making myself very small, and that you were letting me, and that neither of us seemed to understand what we were doing to each other. Silence. "He wrote to you," Andrew said. "He wrote to both of us." Anna pushed the letter across the table. "There are 2 pages. The second one is addressed to you." Andrew looked at the letter on the table between them for a long moment. Then he picked it up and read it. Anna watched his face as he did. She watched the expressions move through him, something tight at first, then something that opened against his will, then something that had no name she could put to it, except cracked. He set the letter down. He said, Andrew started, then stopped. Tried again. He said that he loved you more than anyone in the world, and that the only thing he wanted before he died was to know that someone else did too. He paused. He said he didn't think I knew what I had. Did you? Anna asked. No. Andrew looked at his hands, at the compass, at her. No, he said. I didn't. And I don't know how to tell you why, except that I have spent my entire life being afraid of exactly the thing I most wanted. And you were it. You have always been it. And I did not know what to do with that, except put distance between us, because distance felt safer than the alternative. Anna stared at him. 3 years. 3 years of silence and closed doors and 11 words over dinner, and she had blamed herself, had thought she was not interesting enough, not warm enough, not something enough. Had tried to make herself smaller, and then recently had tried to make herself larger, and through all of it had never once considered that the problem was not her size at all, but his fear. That is the most cowardly thing I have ever heard, she said. Andrew absorbed it. Yes, I disappeared, Andrew. I disappeared inside this house while you were afraid. I know. I stopped believing I was worth looking at. Her voice did not break. She would not let it break. I started riding out to that village because I needed to be somewhere that I mattered to someone. I built that library because I needed to create something that proved I existed. She stopped, breathed. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, he said. And then, with the raw specificity of a man who has been sitting with something for a very long time, I understood it the night of the storm. When I came looking for you, and you were on that road, in the rain, with medicine for other people's children, alone. Because it never occurred to you that I would come with you if you asked. Would you have? She said, direct, no softness. The pause was its own answer. No, he admitted. Not then. I don't think I would have known how. Then we have a very large problem, Anna said. I know, he said. I know we do. The conversation did not fix anything. She had not expected it to. Fixing was not what that morning was about. That morning was about the specific, painful work of finally seeing each other clearly, without the comfortable distance of politeness between them. What it did do was change the air in the house, not immediately, not dramatically, but in the small structural way of a building that has been leaning one direction for years and is slowly, carefully being straightened. Andrew began coming to dinner without being the version of himself that was already somewhere else. He asked questions about the library, about the families in Claremont, about the lending records she kept. The questions were not polished. They were awkward, Sometimes the questions of a man who has been out of the habit of genuine curiosity for long enough that it takes effort to remember how. But they were real. Anna answered them. She was not warm. She was honest, which was more important. She did not tell Henry Westcott about any of it. She had not seen Henry since the night of the storm, had not sought him out, had not ridden the North Road. She missed his company with a plainness she could not entirely suppress, missed the ease of it, the way conversation with him required nothing except being herself. But she understood in the clear-eyed way she understood most things, that she could not think straight about her marriage while standing inside the warmth of someone else's regard. It was not until Curtis Webb came to find her at the estate one Thursday morning, riding out himself, which he almost never did, which told her, before he opened his mouth, that something was wrong, that everything shifted again. He stood in the entry hall, turning his hat in his hands, and said, "Ma'am, I think you need to know something, and I think you need to know it before it goes any further." Anna looked at him steadily. "Sit down, Curtis. Tell me." Curtis Webb sat. He was not a man given to dramatic presentations. He laid it out plainly, the way practical men did when they had made up their minds to say a hard thing. There was a man named Harlan Briggs, a land speculator out of Richmond, new to the county, moving quietly, who had been buying up debt. Specifically, the debts of the smaller farm families. The ones in Claremont who had borrowed modest amounts during the hard winters of 1811 and 1812, and had been slowly paying it back as the harvests recovered. "He bought the notes cheap," Curtis said. "Legal, all of it. But here's the thing, ma'am. He's been calling them in early, all at once, demanding full payment within 30 days. None of these families have got that kind of cash on hand. That's why they borrowed in the first place." Anna felt something go cold and focused in her chest. "Who holds the notes now?" "Briggs does. Purchased them from old McAllister's widow after McAllister died last spring. She didn't know what she had, and he paid her fair enough for them that she didn't ask questions. And the families. They'll lose the land, most of them. Can't pay in 30 days, the note terms allow for seizure." Curtis's voice was flat with the anger of a man who had decided the most useful thing he could do with his fury was hold it still. 12 families, Mrs. Blackwell. The Hargroves are among them." Anna sat very still. Martha Hargrove. The boy with the fever who had recovered. The kitchen where someone had asked her for the first time in longer than she could remember if she was all right. "How much total?" she said. "All 12 notes together. What is the sum?" Curtis named the figure. It was considerable. It was not for a woman of her inheritance and her careful management of the Whitfield household accounts over 3 years impossible. "I'll need to see the actual notes," she said. "Can you get me copies?" Curtis blinked. "Ma'am, I'm not asking you to do anything irregular, Curtis. I'm asking if you can get me copies of the legal documents so that I understand exactly what Harlan Briggs purchased and what terms he is entitled to enforce, and where, if anywhere, he has made an error." Curtis looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man recalibrating. "I can get copies," he said. "Good. Bring them tomorrow. And Curtis." She met his eyes. "Don't tell anyone what I'm looking for. Not yet." He left. Anna sat in the entry hall alone for 60 seconds, thinking at a speed she usually reserved for genuine crises. Then she went to her desk and began writing. She did not tell Andrew that evening. She had her reasons, and she examined them honestly while she went through the copies of the notes that Curtis delivered the following morning. Some of her reasons were practical. She needed to understand the situation fully before anyone else weighed in with opinions about what she should or should not do. Some of her reasons were about Andrew, specifically about the fact that they were in the early fragile work of rebuilding something, and she was not yet sure he would support this, and she was not ready to have the first real collision of their new honesty be over money. And some of her reasons, she admitted to herself, were simply that she needed to prove she could do this herself. She found the error on the second day. It was in the original loan agreement, a clause buried in the standard McAllister language that specified that early call of the note required 60 days' notice, not 30. Briggs had given 30. He had either missed it or calculated that none of the Claremont families were educated enough to find it. He had not calculated for Anna Whitfield. She read the clause 4 times. Then she sat back in her chair and let out a breath that had been sitting in her lungs for 2 days. She wrote a letter to a lawyer in Charlottesville named Everett Holt, who had handled her own inheritance paperwork and who she trusted to be both competent and discreet. She laid out the situation and the clause and asked for his opinion by return post. She had his reply within the week Briggs was in violation. The 30-day notices were unenforceable. The families had their 60 days. 60 days was enough time to do something. She was mapping out the next steps carefully systematically in the notebook that had begun to fill with something more than private grief, and carried observations when she heard Andrew's voice in the hall. He was not alone. She heard a second voice, male, familiar. And then Andrew opened the study door, and behind him, looking not quite comfortable and not quite apologetic, was Henry Westcott. Anna stood. Henry came by to discuss the Grayfield North fence line, Andrew said, and his voice was careful. Apparently it borders our property, and there's a question about the boundary markers. Henry met her eyes briefly. His expression told her nothing and everything he was there for, exactly the reason Andrew said, and also the air in the room was immediately aware of all the things that had not been said between any of them. "I didn't realize you were in here," Henry said to her. "I can come back another time." "No," Anna said, and made a decision on the spot. "Actually, I'm glad you're both here." Andrew looked at her. "Sit down," she said to both of them. "There's something I need to tell you, and I have been managing it alone long enough." She told them about Briggs, about the notes, about the clause, about Everett Holt's letter, and what it meant. She told them plainly and quickly, without drama, with the exact specificity of a woman who had done her homework and knew it. When she finished, the room was silent. Henry said, "You found this yourself?" "Yes." "In 2 days?" "Yes." He looked at Andrew with an expression that was not quite pointed, but was not nothing. Andrew was looking at Anna with the expression she had begun to recognize, the one that was not the closed door, not the distant courtesy, but the other one. The one that cost him something to show. "What do you need?" he said. "Not what do you want to do. Not I'll handle it. What do you need?" Something unlocked in her chest that she had not known was locked. "Money," she said, "and your name on a letter to Briggs informing him of his error. He'll take it more seriously coming from Whitfield Estate than from me alone." She paused. "And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." Andrew looked at her for a long, steady moment. "I do," he said. 3 weeks later, Harlan Briggs's notices were voided. The 12 families in Claremont kept their land. Anna arranged quietly through Everett Holt for the notes to be restructured with reasonable terms and a payment schedule that acknowledged what the families could actually manage. Briggs left the county without much noise, which was the exact amount of noise Anna had intended for him to make. Henry Westcott came to find her at the library the afternoon the last paperwork was settled. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and looked at the shelves she had built, and the chalkboard, and the stack of newly returned books on the table. "You did that," he said. "All of it." "We all did," she said. He shook his head gently. "No, you did that. You saw it. You figured it out. You built the solution before any of us knew there was a problem." He paused. "I want you to know that I see it. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, Anna, I want you to know I see you." She looked at him, at this good, honest man who had given her back something she had forgotten she was allowed to have. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've been this summer." Something in his face understood what she was saying. He didn't make her say the rest. He simply nodded slow and sure with the grace of a man who had enough self-respect to accept a truth without making it harder than it had to be. "You're going to be all right," he said. "Yes," she said. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed it entirely. He put his hat on and walked out the door, and she watched him go, and she let herself feel all of it, the loss of that ease, the grief of a road not taken, the absolute certainty that she had made the right choice anyway, and then she closed the library, picked up her notebook, and rode home. Andrew was waiting on the front steps. Not inside. not in his study. On the steps in the late afternoon gold of an August evening, as if he had been watching for her. She pulled Pearl to a stop, looked at him. "I thought you might want company," he said. "For the ride tomorrow. To Claremont." She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had been afraid for 3 years and was trying badly and sincerely, and for the first time, not to be. "I would," she said. She handed Pearl's reins to the stable boy and walked up the steps and went inside, and Andrew followed her, and the door did not close with its usual finality behind them. It stayed open. Andrew kept his word. The next morning he was up before she was, which had never once happened in 3 years of marriage. She came downstairs to find him already at the breakfast table, coat on, boots on, coffee in hand, with the particular self-conscious straightness of a man who has made a decision and is determined to follow through before his nerve runs out. Mrs. Doyle was doing an extraordinary job of pretending this was completely normal. Anna stopped in the doorway, looked at him. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," he said. "Such a small thing, such an enormous thing." She sat down, poured her coffee, and they ate breakfast together. Actually, together, both present, both in the same room, in the same moment, and Andrew asked her what route she planned to ride to Claremont, and she told him, and he nodded and said he knew a shorter way that cut through the east pasture if she didn't mind the gate. She didn't mind the gate. They rode out together in the early morning cool side by side, and Anna was acutely aware of every inch of distance between them on that road. Aware of it the way you are aware of something newly changed, something that used to be one way and is now another, and your body hasn't caught up to the fact yet. They didn't talk much on the ride, but the silence was different. She could not fully explain how it was different, except that it had stopped pressing down on her, and had started simply existing between them, neutral and breathable, the way silence is supposed to be between two people who are not afraid of each other. When they reached Claremont, she introduced him to Curtis Webb properly, not as the master of Whitfield Estate, but as Andrew, who had come to help. She watched Curtis shake his hand and assess him in the frank way of a working man who does not particularly care about titles and cares very much about whether a person is going to be useful. Curtis apparently decided he might be. He put Andrew to work immediately helping carry the new shelving that had arrived for the library's second room. Andrew, who had grown up with enough money that manual labor was not something he had done in years, took off his coat without being asked and got to work without complaint. Anna watched him from across the room and felt something shift in her that had been locked for a very long time. Not love returning, it had never entirely left, but trust. Trust doing the slow, grudging work of coming back. Martha Hargrove found her at the library that afternoon. The boy was with her, fully recovered now, bright-eyed and running ahead of his mother down the street, the way children do when they have survived something, and the world looks new again. Martha caught him by the collar at the door and steered him inside, and then stood looking at Anna with the expression of a woman who has been composing what she wants to say for some time. "I heard what you did," Martha said. "About Briggs, about the notes. It was a legal matter that needed correcting," Anna said. "Mrs. Blackwell." Martha's voice was firm. "Don't do that. Don't make it small. 12 families kept their land because of what you did. My boy will grow up on his own land because of what you did. Don't tell me that's just a legal matter." Anna looked at her, at this woman who had asked her months ago in a small kitchen if she was all right. "You're welcome," she said, and meant it without deflection, which was harder than it sounded. Martha nodded. Then she said, "Is that your husband carrying shelves in there?" "It is." Martha considered this information with the careful neutrality of a woman who had heard enough from enough people to have formed opinions she was choosing not to share. "Good," she said finally, "just that. Good," and took her son's hand and walked inside to borrow a book. Anna stood in the doorway and laughed quietly to herself, the kind of laugh that is really a breath of relief, and then went back to work. The first real fight happened 2 weeks later. She had expected a fight eventually. Reconciliation in books and in the talk of romantic people was a clean thing. Confession, forgiveness, and then a gentle fade to better days. Reconciliation in real life was messier, and Anna had never been naive enough to think otherwise. What she had not anticipated was the specific shape it would take. It started over the library's expansion. Anna had been approached by a Charlottesville merchant named Aldrich, who had a vacant building 2 streets over from the current library space, larger, better situated with a room that could function as a small classroom. He was willing to lease it for a modest amount. Anna had run the figures. It was manageable. She had written to 3 potential donors and received 2 favorable responses. She had, without entirely meaning to, begun planning the move before telling Andrew. She told him at dinner on a Thursday, presenting it as she usually presented things, completely with the numbers, with the logic, with the plan already substantially developed. Andrew set down his fork. "You've already committed to this," he said. "I've committed to exploring it," she said carefully. "I haven't signed anything." "You wrote to donors. You ran figures. You've been planning this for how long, Anna?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. Not the old quiet, not the checked-out, I am already elsewhere quiet. This was engaged quiet. The quiet of a man who was frustrated and was trying to handle it in a way he was not entirely practiced at. "We agreed to talk to each other." "We did. I'm talking to you now." "After 2 weeks of planning, because I needed to know if it was worth discussing first." She kept her voice level. "I have spent 3 years bringing things to this table and being told we'd discuss it another time. You cannot expect me to rewire 3 years of habit in 3 weeks." The words landed. She saw them land. Andrew's jaw tightened, and then he did something she had not seen him do before in the context of a disagreement. He stopped. Visibly stopped himself. Took a breath. "That's fair," he said. She blinked. "It's fair," he said again, like a man who had decided to mean it and was working through the effort in real time. "I made it so that bringing things to me felt pointless. That's on me. But I am asking Anna to bring me in earlier, not because I need to approve it, because I want to be part of it." She looked at him across the table. This was the man she had been looking for inside Andrew Blackwell for 3 years. Imperfect, clumsy with his own feelings, but trying genuinely, visibly at a cost to his considerable pride, trying. "Then come see the building with me on Saturday," she said. "Tell me what you think." "I'll be there," he said. He was. The building was right for it. She knew it walking through, could see immediately where the shelves would go and how the classroom would be arranged. Andrew walked through it with the attentive silence of a man who was actually looking, not performing consideration, and when he came back to where she was standing, he said, "The roof will need work before winter." "I know, I've budgeted for it. The flooring in the back room is uneven. I know that too. The east-facing windows will be good for reading light in the mornings." She turned to look at him. He was studying the windows with what she could only describe as genuine interest, as if he was already imagining what the room would look like when it was finished, as if it mattered to him. "It's a good space," he said. Something warm and careful moved through her chest. "Yes, it is." "Let's do it," he said. "Not you. Not you can do it, or I suppose it's a reasonable plan. Let's." She looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled. Not the careful, managed smile she had practiced for 3 years of social occasions, but a real one, the kind that came from a place she had forgotten she still had. Andrew saw it. She watched him see it. She watched something in his face open up the way a room opens when someone finally raises the blinds. "I haven't seen you smile like that in a long time," he said. His voice was quiet, a little rough. "No," she agreed. "You haven't." He held out his hand. She looked at it. At this gesture, simple, direct, asking nothing except what it was offering. She thought about 3 years of distance, and about William's letter, and about a notebook full of sentences written in the dark, and about a woman who had ridden into a storm alone, because she had stopped believing anyone would come. She took his hand. The new library opened in October, 2 weeks before the first frost. Half of Claremont turned out for it. Curtis Webb made a speech that went on considerably longer than necessary and was wonderful anyway. The Hargrove boy helped carry in the last crate of books, insisting on managing it himself, with the dignity of an 8-year-old who takes responsibility very seriously. Dr. Pembroke brought his wife, who had been skeptical about the whole enterprise and was now loudly pretending she had supported it from the beginning. Marybeth Caldwell stood next to Anna and surveyed the room with the satisfaction of a woman who had always known how things would turn out. "I told you," Marybeth said. "You told me to be careful," Anna said. "Same thing in my experience." Marybeth glanced across the room where Andrew was talking to Thomas Caldwell with an expression on his face that was, and this was the remarkable part, open. Present. The expression of a man who was actually where he was. "He looks different. He is different," Anna said. "A little. It's slow." "Slow is fine," Marybeth said. "Slow means it's real." Anna watched her husband laugh at something Thomas said. A real laugh, not the social version, and thought about the long distance between the man who had sat at a dinner table 11 words at a time and the man standing across that room right now. It was not a short distance, and they had not traveled all of it. There was still ground to cover, she knew, that held no illusions about how much patient work still lay ahead of them, how many old habits would resurface and need to be addressed, and how many conversations would be awkward and difficult before they became easy. But they were traveling. Together. That was the thing that was new. The twist came in November, and it came from a direction she had not anticipated. A letter arrived from Richmond addressed to Andrew from a firm of lawyers she didn't recognize. She left it on his desk unopened, as she always did with his correspondence. But that evening, he came to find her in the library, the estate library where she was working late, and he stood in the doorway with the letter in his hand and an expression she could not read. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her. He placed the letter on the table. "My father," he said, "had business dealings I was not fully aware of, before he died. The lawyers in Richmond have been settling the estate for 2 years. He paused. "It appears that some of those dealings involved debt instruments, the same kind that Briggs was using this summer." Anna went very still. "Andrew." "He wasn't Briggs," Andrew said quickly, firmly. He didn't call them in early, he didn't manipulate anyone. But he held notes, on properties in 2 counties. He met her eyes directly, including 3 in Claremont. She looked at him. The Claremont families. The people she had fought for all summer. The people whose land she had protected from Briggs. 3 of them had been making payments quietly, not to a predatory speculator from Richmond, but to the Blackwell estate, to her husband's inheritance. "Did you know?" she asked. Her voice was level, and she needed it to be level. "No," he said. "I swear to you, Anna, I did not know." She looked at his face. At this man she had spent months learning to read. He was telling the truth. She could see it. "The lawyers want to know what to do with the notes," he said. "They default to me now. I can call them in, hold them, sell them, or—" He stopped. Pushed the letter across the table. "Or I can do what you tell me is right." She looked at the letter, at his face, at the extraordinary, unlikely fact of her husband sitting across from her asking what she thought was right. Not telling her, asking. She thought of Martha Hargrove's kitchen, of 12 families and 60 days, and a clause buried in an old loan agreement. Of William, who had believed she was worth fighting for before she believed it herself. "We release them," she said. "The notes. Full forgiveness of the remaining debt. Draft the paperwork with Everett Holt so it's done properly and they have documentation." She paused. "And we don't make a production of it. We don't announce it. We send the letters and that's all." Andrew looked at her for a moment. "That's a significant amount of money," he said. "I know what it is," she said. "I know you do." And then, with the particular simplicity of a man who has made his decision and is at peace with it, "All right." The letters went out that week. No ceremony. No announcement. Just paperwork, arriving in the hands of 3 Claremont families, informing them in the dry language of legal documentation that their debt had been discharged in full and the notes retired. Martha Hargrove came to the library 2 days after her letter arrived and stood in front of Anna and did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Was this you?" "It was Andrew's inheritance to do with as he chose," Anna said. "Was this you?" Martha said again, and her voice had something in it that wasn't going to be redirected. "It was both of us," Anna said. Martha nodded. She reached out and took Anna's hand briefly. Just a moment, just the particular grip of a woman who means something by it, and then let go and walked out without another word. It was enough. On the last Sunday of November, with the cold finally settling into the Virginia fields and the year beginning its long turn toward winter, Andrew asked her to walk with him to the north pasture. She went. She didn't ask why. He had planted something along the fence line. She saw it as they approached a row of young oak saplings, barely knee-high staked against the wind. 6 of them, evenly spaced in the dark November ground. She looked at them. Looked at him. "They'll be tall in 20 years, he said. 30. "Yes," she said, "they will. I wanted to plant something that would last," he said. He was looking at the saplings, not at her, with the particular focus of a man who is saying something large and finding it easier not to make eye contact while he says it. "I have not given you much to hold on to. These 3 years, I know that. And I know that planting trees doesn't fix what I failed to give you." He paused. "But I intend to be here. For all of it. The growing and the years and all of it. If you'll have me." Anna looked at the side of his face. At this complicated, frightened, trying man who had planted 6 oak trees in November dirt as an act of faith in a future he was asking her to share. "I'm not the woman you married," she said. "I want you to know that. I am not going to become small again. I am not going to stop riding out to that village or running that library or doing what I believe is right because it is inconvenient or because it makes conversation at dinner parties awkward. I am not going to disappear again, Andrew. Not for anyone." He turned and looked at her, fully, with the complete attention she had wanted from him for 3 years. "I know," he said. "I don't want you to." "Then we have an understanding," she said. "We have an understanding," he agreed. She slid her hand into his. He held it not carefully, not like something fragile, like something real. Like a man who had finally learned the difference. The wind moved through the oak saplings. The fields stretched out around them, brown and quiet and waiting for spring. Anna Whitfield Blackwell stood in the cold November air and felt for the first time in longer than she could name entirely like herself. Not a function. Not a convenience. Not a woman who had learned to disappear so thoroughly that she half believed she deserved to be invisible. Herself. Present and whole, and standing on her own ground. She had ridden into storms alone. She had built something from nothing in a room above a general store. She had found a buried clause in a legal document and used it like a key. She had said the hard things out loud and survived the saying of them. She had let herself be seen by a good man and had chosen clear-eyed and freely the harder and more honest road. She had come back to herself, and she was never going to leave again.